Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Something I often see with Andor comments is in regards to what they now call fan service, which is just meaning you have legendary characters, or really the main characters that George Lucas had implemented into Star Wars and that Star Wars is all about, to be in Star Wars shows. And for some reason that's called fan service. Now I understand interjecting one of these characters in a moment that doesn't really require them or really makes no sense. However, in the case of Andor, I do feel that Palpatine could make an appearance. Now, let me make it very clear. We don't need Palpatine in Andor. We don't need Darth Vader. We don't need Boba Fett to be hired by the Empire to go after Andor. We don't need any of these quote-unquote fan-service-y characters, aka main characters of Star Wars. Andor is a show on its own. And in fact, I prefer not having any of these characters in the show because it portrays that Andor, the show itself, while the events are very alerting to the ISB and the Empire, they still aren't big enough for Palpatine or Vader to show up, which only boosts Palpatine and Vader's presence by not being there. If they were to show up for every little small thing, it would really kind of undermine their character overall. Now, that being said, could we see Palpatine or any of these legendary characters in the final episode of Andor? I think it would make sense if we saw Palpatine. Let me explain why. These are the last waning years of the Senate. The same Senate that we saw all throughout the prequel trilogy in Episode 1, Episode 2, and Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. The same Senate that Yoda and Palpatine fought in and destroyed, which is now, of course, repaired. Now, we must ask ourselves, what happens in the original trilogy where the Senate isn't really shown at all? Well, just imagine, why would there need to be any sort of discussion or meeting or Senate hearing if there's one person with a planet killer the size of a planet itself? That being the Death Star. So what I think could happen here is that Palpatine will either show up in the Senate himself when Mon Mothma is speaking, or he will send an ambassador, that being Mas Amedda, Sly Moore, or even showing up as a hologram from somewhere else, much like he did to the Nemoidians in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, with Darth Maul. Now, okay, we have to ask ourselves, why would Palpatine show up? Well, it would obviously be political. He would be enforcing his power over the Senate, and he would do everything in his power to avoid even a hint of what he's doing with the Death Star. Palpatine is very invested in keeping this a secret. That's why he had that prison the way he did, where every single inmate would have actually died and perished in there. Once you enter, you're never leaving, because he never wanted any of the outside world, outside galaxy, to know what they were doing or building in there. If any word had got out, his secret plans for the Death Star being built could have been in jeopardy. Therefore, if anyone is to show up, it would be Palpatine at the end of Episode 12 in some sort of a Senate Council scene. We could see him discussing with delegates, we could see him announcing things to the galaxy through the Senate, just like he did in the Clone Wars Season 7. Now, while it would be cool to see Palpatine fight and do all this stuff, it really wouldn't make sense for that to happen in Andor. Andor is much more of a talking show, much more of a political drama, so to speak. A sci-fi, mystery, spy thriller. Think Blade Runner in Star Wars. So Palpatine showing up would have to have a very meaningful scene where he would implement some new rule over the galaxy, or he would possibly send out a search for bounty hunters to track down Cassian Andor. I could see him lying to the public just as he did with the Jedi. I could see him saying things like everyone's freedoms are up for grabs, everyone is in danger, the galaxy is in danger because of these terrorists, he would probably call them, which we know them as rebels. And he would do what Palpatine does best, which is manipulate the public into thinking that the guys he doesn't like are really the bad guys. Now, of course, in the Clone Wars, we saw what Palpatine did playing both sides of the Separatists and the Republic. However, what a lot of people don't know is what he did in the Revenge of the Sith novel, which was signed off by George Lucas and written by Matthew Stover. Now, in the novel, Palpatine actually brainwashed the entire galaxy to believe that the Jedi who attacked him were attacking him for no reason and came into his office to kill him. And if it wasn't for his apprentice saving him, then he would have been dead. He had brandished the Jedi as traitors, as murderers, and given them all the title of high treason. Now, I think Palpatine would do something very similar to the galaxy here, where he would make Andor and anyone else who was part of the heist and the rebellion to be just as malevolent and evil as the Jedi, or so he made them seem. So if we do see Palpatine, I think he would send a wide message to the galaxy as to how dangerous these people are, to post their photos and likeness, and to have a galaxy-wide search of these criminals, saying that they escaped jail, and so on and so forth, probably giving them some random sentences. Now, while of course seeing Palpatine would be really cool, we have heard that Tony Gilroy said there won't be any fan service, and it's unfortunate that they think of these main characters as fan service, but that's the era we live in now, where anything that has to do with the main characters of Star Wars is apparently fan service, even if it makes sense for them to arrive. And so let me say one more time, we don't need Palpatine, we don't need Vader, we don't need Luke Skywalker or any of these characters in Andor. But it would make the story a lot more interesting, I think, and it would make sense if Palpatine were to show up and explain very briefly that everyone's freedoms are at stake and to be very careful of who they speak to and who they trust, as these criminals and terrorists are on the rise, which we know them as rebels. Now, at the time of this, Maul is still alive, Obi-Wan is of course alive, Vader is alive. This is 5 years before Episode 4, so Leia, Luke, all those guys are around, Ahsoka, Boba Fett. So I could see for Season 2 Palpatine even hiring Boba Fett in secret to go and track Andor down, because the ISB has failed, the Empire has failed in tracking him, so now they need a hired professional, a hired gun, and who better than Boba Fett? I'm gonna make a video about that alone, but I'd love to know your thoughts on it down below. Do you think Palpatine will show up in the season finale for Andor? Do you think he'll brainwash the galaxy into thinking that the rebels are some sort of terrorists? And do you think he'll hire a bounty hunter to capture Andor once and for all? I think it would be really interesting if he captured one of them, possibly even Luthen, on top of Bix. And if word got out, then Cassian would have to team up with Saw Gerrera to free Luthen and Bix away from either Boba Fett or Dengar or Bossk or whoever they would get. I think that would be a really cool finale. But hey, maybe that's just me wanting fan service. Let me know what you guys think down below. How do you think the season finale will end? I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and may the Force be with you always.